and interesting conversations. I'm going to use a little bit of privilege. I don't know how many people here used to hear when my father spoke in the Senate, but he was not really known for his brevity. But he was quite brief tonight, so I'm going to take some of his time. Unfortunately, however you look at it, that seems to have come through the blood. So a mission. What is a mission? A calling, strongly felt aim or objective, an assignment, a predetermined objective. These are some of the more easily found and understood interpretations of the phrase. What I want to do this evening is to look at some assignments that I think this generation needs to take on in looking forward. Jamaica is overflowing with potential. I mean, we fight above our weight in almost everything we do globally. But there's some things that we just have not seemed to fix. Things that, if we don't address them, I feel we will maybe never truly release our potential. So, I want to speak about some fundamentals today. Some things I consider fundamental. Not macro or microeconomic fundamentals, another kind. Some fall under, I think you could put them under the category of framework fundamentals, and others, I think you could look at them as more social fundamentals. But they all glance against the guiding principles, or some of the guiding principles of the Vision 2030 plan. Transformational leadership, transparency and accountability, and social cohesion, I think, are the three that jumped out at me the most. And although my assignment today was to look forward, I want to ask you to just indulge me while I look back just a few years at some issues that I think will put the first mission in better context. Jamaica was granted universal adult suffrage in 1944. In the general elections of 1944, 49, 55, and 59, however, no more than one female candidate was ever successful out of the 32 seats available. It wasn't until 1956 that the first woman was appointed to the Legislative Council, which was the predecessor of the Senate that we have today. And although there were 3 more women appointees before independence, up until then, and for many years after, there were never more than 2 or 3 women in Parliament. So here we are today, 50 years after independence, and some things have changed. We have a female Prime Minister. But to say that this proves that there are no gender-based inequities is like saying that there's no racism in the States because they have a black president. The fact is that inequities continue to subsist today. So although the number of seats in Parliament have doubled since independence, almost doubled, the number of women sitting in those seats remains inordinately low. We have 8 women in the House of Representatives. That's 12.6% of the 63 seats. And in the Senate, we have 5, 23.8% of the 21 seats available. In terms of where we stand in the world, just this year, we fell from 87th to 97th out of 189 countries in terms of the number of women we have in Parliament. So some of you are undoubtedly saying, and so what? Well, I'm going to borrow the words of the former Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan, who said that gender equality is more than a goal in itself. It is a precondition for the challenges of reducing poverty, promoting sustainable development, and building good governance. In support of his position, I just want to point out a few things. Research has shown that globally, increased numbers of women in government results in more representative leadership, which in turn results in better policy outcomes and more sustainable development paths. Just from sheer population numbers, women outnumber men globally. In Jamaica, we're 50.8% of the population. Our government is not representative of that fact. been. Women are primary caregivers across the world, and accordingly, we're the primary conduits of values and behaviors in societies. As we empower women and sensitize men as to women's rights, we will reduce gender-based crime, such as domestic violence and trafficking, and we will encourage a mutual respect that will redound to the ultimate benefit and wellness of our entire society. In respect of governance, women are more known to naturally lead through consultation, which increases the likelihood of buying and engagement, and which is very much needed in tough economic times. So this brings me to mission 1. This generation must seek to increase the participation of women at the highest levels of leadership, both national and community levels. We must ensure that the national policy on gender equity approved by Cabinet in 2011 is implemented, and that we debate the issue of quotas at the representational level to determine whether there is an appropriate model for the Jamaican Parliament. Now, admittedly, the potentially transformative impact of more women in government is dependent on whether those women themselves are agents of change. Because if they are too born of polarizing tribal politics, if they too are steeped in politics of divisiveness, then clearly gender becomes less of an issue. So leadership, training, personal development, these are important steps as we debate quotas. But I want to suggest that leadership training and development are issues which some of our men should also consider. And this takes me to another one of our framework issues, the need for change in our politics. If we continue to build on a foundation that does not promote the benefits of the whole of Jamaica, if we continue to cater only to the needs of persons who seek to derive benefits along deeply drawn political lines of affiliation, we will forever be asking ourselves, why are we, a country blessed with so much, not better off? Why are our people poor? Why are we not better educated? Why don't we have higher levels of employment? We're hugely creative, we're talented and industrious. We all just heard Gordon inspiring us right here today. So why is it that we cannot implement the right policy mix so that we can grow? The short answer, presuming that I'm not speaking about finance tonight, as I said, our politics. We need better politics. So a mission of this generation must be to remove garrison politics from our culture. We must remove it with all of its mentalities of dependence, of intimidation, of exploitation. We must get rid of the destructive tribalism that leads us blinded down paths of irrational behavior. That position where people feel forced to defend the most objective of wrongs, to find every justification, where it is that the only thing that makes a difference in their position is their political affiliation. I'm still reeling, I'm sorry, from the statement that the removal of the green from the flag could not have been deliberate because plants were on the stage and the plants are green. I mean, really? Seriously? And then we ask why people are disengaged from the process? We have to get real. We really have to educate people. We have to truly empower them, not speak about it, but empower them to vote on issues, not the promise of scarce benefits. I mean, we have to understand that people will always vote based on self-interest to some extent. That's human nature. But we have to remove the visceral part of that self-interest. We have to raise the level of participation of persons whose self-interest and the interests of their children are aligned with the objective interests of our country. So along with the mission of dismantling the tribal mentality, I want to suggest that we take on the mission of reigniting and inspiring the uncommitted. We have to get our generation to understand what our ancestors went through to give us the right to vote. Once upon a time you had to be a man be white, you had to own land, and you had to pay taxes of a particular amount in order to vote. Now, you just have to be 18 and relatively sane. you have to at least have those two things, and then you're good. You can vote. So how important is that? Because if you don't vote, what people need to understand is that you're ceding your power to somebody else. And if that person is somebody who values a good plate of curry goat or a good oxtail more than a clear and effective education policy, then you have essentially sold away your opportunity to help shape Jamaica's future and the future of your children. You've ceded it to a plate of oxtail. We have to understand the importance of our vote. And I think this generation needs to take that on. So, I think we could ask maybe the Jamaica50 Secretariat if they would take on a project. I think a good legacy project would be, you know, Project Community Freedom, Project Destroy Garrisonism. Somebody could come up with a catchy phrase in G2K, I'm sure. But I mean, I think we should take this on in a real and meaningful way. I mean, our system of government is based on the Westminster system. It's based on parties, and there's nothing wrong with political parties. There's nothing wrong with being passionate about your party and being loyal to it. But the visceral divide, the inability to take ideas just because of where they came from, those things, we're going to live those things. Those are vestiges of the past that we need to do away with. While they may apparently remain policies that could result in the success of political parties, where the uncommitted refuses to vote, I wish to leave you with the thought that these are certain recipes for failure of our country. So linked to this issue is our next mission. Next generation, we have lots of missions. We have to embed better governance in government at all levels. So public officials, whether elected at the local or general level, whether appointed or contracted to serve on boards, they must be held to high standards. We must be held to high standards, and we must be held accountable. We must have one set of standards for leadership in this country, one set of standards, regardless of political affiliation. Transparency, accountability, and integrity are tenets of good governance, and they must be key tenets of government. So, despite some missteps, several tough decisions were taken by the former administration, and lots of legislative time was spent in preparing bills and policies which now need to be leveraged. They should not be dialed back because of an application of different standards. So I want to ask, the 2011 impeachment bill tabled last year, where is it on this year's legislative agenda? The defamation bill that aims to modernize the laws of slander and defamation and enhance freedom of the press. When is that to be retabled? The laws to amend the Access to Information Act and repeal the Official Secrets Act. Where are those bills on the legislative agenda? Will the sensitive posts bill come to life? That policy direction required that a 2/3 majority of both houses be required to appoint certain sensitive posts, adding a level of transparency to the system of appointments in our country. The Whistleblower Act, that was passed to allow for protection of workers in circumstances where they report corruption. Where are the regulations to allow for its implementation? This generation needs to ensure that we have a legislative framework that is fit for purpose, for the purpose of taking governance and government to another level. Because the framework that we have is fraying at the seams. It's no longer fit for our purpose, not for this generation. So I want to move next to the social side. And goal number one, yes, I said that I was taking some of another panelist's time, right? Goal number one of Vision 2030. Jamaicans are to be empowered to achieve their fullest potential. National Outcome 1 is a vision for a healthy and stable population. The plan, however, acknowledges that among the challenges challenges to achieving Goal 1 and National Outcome 1 are inadequate health personnel, infrastructure and equipment, inadequate parenting, and inadequate support for the vulnerable in society. So the first challenge highlights the cyclical impact of the fact that if we don't get population right, government, and when I say government, I don't mean political administration, will never have enough resources to ensure that all citizens have access to quality physical and mental health and that they live fulfilling and productive lives. To me, the challenge is actually broader than health services, however. And the fact is that Jamaica is not alone in having a tradition of looking at the allocation of public resources from a traditional economic perspective. The so-called unproductive sectors of gender and reproductive rights, etc., are ignored to a large extent. But it is undeniable that if we have too many unintended and unplanned pregnancies, it increases the number of Jamaican children who are not cared for, which in turn creates much of the dysfunction with which we're currently struggling as a nation. So we speak about trying to reduce the number of children on the streets, reduce the number of children being abused, and the number who end up in places of safety and homes. But we don't speak about trying to empower our young women and our young girls to make better decisions about the timing and sizes of their families. We don't speak enough about teaching our young men about responsible sexual behavior and what it really should mean to be a man and a father. In other words, we keep focusing on the symptoms and not the causes. From an economic perspective, this contributes to the fundamental inability of government to provide appropriate educational, health, and welfare facilities. So Jamaica's children who are unable to either secure places in a school system or attain a reasonable level of education are at risk. Where they are raised in homes where the parent or parents are unaware of the requisite parenting tools that can help their children develop in ways that will release their potential, especially when you're looking at all of the external impacts from the internet, cable TV, and a general degradation in values. You have to have the tools to combat that. And if you don't, you're at risk again of developing antisocial behaviors and simply adding to the number of adults who don't contribute to the productivity of the nation, but instead contribute to the cycle of violence and poverty, which further strains national resources. And this is not a story of rich and poor. You can be poor and a great parent and rich and a horrible parent. Rich or poor, everybody needs health care, everybody needs a good education, everybody needs to fulfill their potential. But the truth is that especially in deep rural and inner city communities, we're having a problem with unintended pregnancies, violence, and a cycle of dependence which impacts wider society, and we need to fix it. The vision of Jamaica as a place to live, work, do business, and raise families cannot materialize if we do not empower our vulnerable girls and women. This must be one of our missions. So some of you are probably asking, so why focus on women? Isn't the issue of our boys' educational attainment, isn't that something that we need to be focusing? And man says, yes, of course we need to focus on that as well. But here's why I think we can't yet afford to stop focusing on women and girls. Today, although we have higher levels of educational attainment than ever before, the rate of unemployment among women is almost twice that of men. So 16.9% women, and it's 9.3% men. And this imbalance has persisted for quite some time. When you take that together with the fact that women make up the larger percentage of the working age population, last year the PSSJ captured that as 885,700 women. Then you consider how many members of the population are not actively engaged in productivity. They are not actively engaged in helping to grow our nation. On this same point, if our women are not engaged in gainful employment, whether self-employment or otherwise, we become more vulnerable to exploitation. One simple example of this is a look at the accident and emergency visits, January to September 2010. 974 women were the victims of sexual assault as compared to 46 men. 974. 653 of those persons were within the age group of 10 to 19. 653, 10 to 19. And 73 were 5 to 9 years old. 137 women attempted to commit suicide, females, as opposed to 48 men. And more than half of those females were between the 10 to 19 age group. And furthermore, on a slightly different note, despite legislation to the contrary, wage inequities subsist at all levels of the economic ladder. Women are not paid equal money for equal work. Fact of life. But the cycle of poverty that is created when all women and girls are forced into early sexual experiences because of economic dependence is an issue that cannot be ignored. It has a wider social impact and it has personal impacts. So this takes me to the next mission. We must revisit the policies related to adolescent mothers. The regulations under the Education Act, I think it's Regulation 31, provides that if a girl gets pregnant, she should be expelled from school, but that the minister may take such action as necessary for her readmission or admission elsewhere after she has delivered. And with respect to the two former ministers of education here today, I just want to suggest that this is a provision that has outlived its time. Why should the minister be involved in such decision? Why is admission, readmission, or transfer not mandatory? I understand that while some principals are willing to readmit adolescent mothers, this is where they generally have a solid family structure and someone to fight for them, and a principal that's open-minded. Only 1/3 of mothers at the last survey that I saw are readmitted into the formal education system. And the studies show that where they have no intervention, they're likely to have more children and not to reach any high level of educational attainment. So you're talking about a reality where since 2000, so more than a decade ago, we've been unable to bring down our adolescent pregnancy rate even as much as 3%. So it was 20.5% in the year 2000, and it's 17.9% today. So we have a problem that's not being fixed. And the point is that if only 1/3 of these girls are being readmitted into schools, you have 2/3 who are not. 2/3 who are not achieving further levels of educational attainment, and 2/3 who are having children who are repeating the cycle. It's something that we need to fix. I don't know if anyone here remembers that recent TV interview with a 32-year-old grandma. She was not grandmother, sorry, but I think it's a 32-year-old parent of 9 children. And she said that it was school at age 13 or 14 to have their first child first. And this is accepted in her community. This is something that we need to fix. If we're going to uplift the whole, if we're going to truly deal with our most vulnerable citizens and raise all of us up, we need to look at that. And where the solution lies is in education. So I want to suggest that we need to ensure that there's effective delivery of health and family life education in schools by persons who are comfortable and competent with the content. It's something that I keep hearing, that a lot of teachers are not comfortable with the content, and that this affects the effectiveness of the delivery. Coming out of the UTEX conference that was held recently, a lot of young people have the feedback that the discussion needs to be more realistic for them, they need to connect more, and then it needs to be more relevant to their daily experience so that they can connect more. That's something that we need to look at, we need to tap into. And where I think as we continue to train teachers in the delivery of this type of content, maybe we need to think about bringing in persons from the National Family Planning Board or FAMPLAN to fill that gap and to ensure that we don't lose anybody that we don't have to lose. We need to train more peer counselors, and we need to ensure that our kids they're armed with information that will help them to make right decisions. We need to ensure that there is effective access to contraceptives to adults and adolescents who are having sex, meaning if you can't stop them, then at least allow them to protect themselves. And this is indisputably less than the economic cost of the alternative. And what is the alternative? The highly scientific approach of closing one's eyes and hoping and wishing that we had a different society. We don't. So we can either lead the society that we have, correct the problems that we have, acknowledge that there are issues of morality and standards that have come from the fundamentals of our educational system, which were, our schools were born out of the church. So we understand that there's a conflict sometimes. But we have realities that we have to deal with. So we need to confront them in a realistic manner and address them. We need to increase the human and infrastructural resources of the Women's Center Foundation of Jamaica to ensure that they can expand their curriculum and that they can expand their counseling facilities and the daycare facilities that will allow young mothers to go back to school. And we need to address the fact that our young boys and men really need family life and reproductive health education to help them deal with their own cultural issues around personal and societal definitions of masculinity as against the realities and roles of men in a productive and nurturing society. So as we work on nurturing and empowering our young girls, we need to also sensitize our men and empower them to embrace another kind of need. So I want to just touch briefly on parenting. Which I know was a very important policy for former Education Minister, leader of opposition, Honest, who's with us here today. And I just want to add my support and my call for the retabling of the National Parenting Support Policy, which had been developed under his leadership. I think it's important that government retables that policy so that we can truly debate in Parliament the issues that are required to raise the level of parenting in our society and what government's role is in creating an effective framework for that. The National Parenting Support Commission, the bill that attaches to the policy that creates that agency, that also needs to be addressed as well. It must be, I think, a mission of this generation to work towards supporting our nation's parents from budgetary and policy perspectives. And this is something that we can't allow to fall by the wayside. It's necessary to counteract the symptoms we experience every day. It's necessary to improve the care of our children, to reduce abuse, to ensure that we can secure the development of happy, well-adjusted, and learning and productive adult members of society, who in turn contribute to our overall prosperity. So G2K, I hope the next forum is going to be set for us to get together and develop the action plans, because I've outlined a lot of missions, and the missions are just about the goal. Now we need to work out exactly how to get there. Some of these matters, I think they speak for themselves. The steps how to get there do speak for themselves. And some of the things we need to be the change, like inspiring people to vote, to contribute more to society, to be positive. And in others, they're more intricate and we need to get together. So G2K, I hope your next mission is to bring us all back here to discuss a plan, the way to go forward. And I want to thank you once again for having me.